enzymes and proteins. They don't code for form or behavior. They've only coded for proteins all along. And I think the form and behavior that we inherit depends on morphic resonance expressed through morphic fields. The genes have to be there to give you the right proteins. You can't make a body without the right proteins. A defective gene will give you defective enzymes and defects in the body, either in the form or in the metabolism. But they're not coding for form and behavior. Morphic resonance depends on similarity. If you ask who are the people who are most similar to each other, then the answer is twins, identical twins. And identical twins have been the center of a great deal of scientific research for more than a century, because it seems the perfect way of separating the effects of genes versus environment, or nature versus nurture. Typically, left-wing people have favored the idea that nurture is important. The way you raise children is more important than the genes, because they think that through social reform, educational reform, you can perfect human nature, or at least improve it. Whereas right-wing people have always taken the view it's mostly inherited. People are just born different, and however hard you try, they'll end up different because they're born that way. So there's no point having endless social engineering to try and make everyone equal, because it won't work. So this has been the basis of a very polarized debate for a long time, with a big political charge to it. The evidence from identical twins seemed to settle it. Identical twins separated soon after birth, adopted by different families, are now known to have extraordinarily similar lives. Not just in eye colour, hair colour, and that kind of thing, but even in things, some of them call their kids by the same name, paint their houses the same colour, have similar hobbies. No one had thought those were coded in the genes, but when it turned out they were so similar in all these ways, people said, the genes do even more than we'd ever thought. And this is the main evidence for this huge edifice of selfish gene theory, sociobiology, and so on. The twin studies, they've what led to this huge overestimate in the importance of genes. But there could be a completely different explanation for these similarities. They're more resonant morphically because they're more similar than any other pair of people. And if one learns something, does something new, the other's likely to pick it up by morphic resonance. So the similarities between identical twins separated soon after birth may in fact be evidence for morphic resonance, not for genetic determinism. So I think it makes perfect sense when you see it that way, and it also explains how people could have been so deceived as to the importance of genes, leading to this hideous problem of the missing heritability problem, which is rocking biology at the moment. It's not publicized much by popularizers of science, because they popularize the triumphs, not the problems. But it is a massive problem. I discuss it in my book, where you can find the details and the references. Now, when we come to the question of what organism in the past was most like an organism today, for example, who in the past was most like you? The answer has to be yourself. We're more similar to ourselves in the past than we are to anybody else. And that means the most specific resonance acting on us from the past will be self-resonance from our own pasts. In the realm of form, in all organisms, self-resonance stabilizes the morphic fields of the organisms, so they remain more or less the same despite the continual turnover of proteins and cells. In the realm of behavior, self-resonance means that you tap into your previous behavior and previous experiences by morphic resonance. In other words, memories needn't be stored inside the brain. Now, the usual assumption, the dogma, which I mentioned earlier, Dogma 7, is that memories are stored inside the brain. It's just taken for granted they must be there. Now, scientists have spent more than 100 years trying to find memories inside the brain, and over again they've drawn a blank. They just simply haven't been able to find them. They've trained rats to learn complex tricks, and then cut out chunks of their brain to see if they can find where the memories are stored. And when the rats have recovered from the operation, even after big chunks of the brain have been removed, they can still remember it. And it didn't matter which bit of the brain, front, back, left, right, upper, lower, you had to leave some brain, otherwise they couldn't. But this led to, by the 1950s, a crisis in biology. And one of the theories that came out of that was the holographic theory of memory storage. You can't find specific memories in particular places, so they must be everywhere, but nowhere in particular. And that's almost untestable. But people have continued trying to locate memories. We know that when memories are being laid down, particularly for spatial learning, there's activity in the hippocampus, and the particular regions of the brain are active during the laying down and the recall of memories. That's well known. But in between, you can't find them. Now, people are always saying there must be yet more elusive memory stores or backup storage systems or something. And they must be in the nerve endings, the synapses, or in phosphorylated proteins or something. They keep being elusive. Despite more than 100 years and enormous effort, they haven't been found. Now, I think the simplest explanation is the most obvious one. They're not there. That's why people can't find them. It's like trying to find memories in your TV set of Borgen or something from last week by analysing the wires and transistors. I wouldn't find any memories of it. I wouldn't be able to tell if you'd watched it or not just by analysing your TV set. That's not how TV works. I think our brains are much more like TV receivers than video recorders. We tune into our memories based on similarity across time. In between, they're not stored in the brain. In fact, the word storage is the wrong word. Storage implies they must be somewhere. Memory is a relation in time, not in space. And I'm suggesting there's a resonance across time between the past and the present. You tune into them. And some methods of tuning into them are more effective than others. Sometimes you can't tune into them. They affect you without you being able to bring them to consciousness. There may be ways of bringing them to consciousness. But whatever's happening, I don't think they're stored inside the brain. And this fits the evidence much better than the conventional memory theory does. I don't think they're stored elsewhere in the body. People sometimes say, well, if they're not in the brain, it must be a tissue memory. I don't think they're stored there either. I think that memory works by resonance. Sometimes when people have had heart transplants, they have memories that seem to come from the donor of the heart. I don't think the memories are inside the heart. I think the heart acts like a tuning system that tunes into the memories of the person who the heart came from. I think we tune into collective memories from many people in the past, and we tune into our own. The difference is a difference of degree, not of kind. We're more similar to ourselves, so we have much more specific tuning into our own memories. But we're similar to lots of other people, especially those most like us, members of our families, of the same culture, and so on. So we have a tuning in, a more general tuning into a collective memory, which Jung called the collective unconscious. And so our individual memory and collective memory are two aspects of the same phenomenon. Now, in the remaining 10 minutes or so, let me turn to the Dogma 8, the mind is inside the head. This is the usual assumption, mental activity is nothing but brain activity, it's all inside the head. Now this is just taken for granted by most people, but when you think about it, it simply doesn't make sense. Now think about vision, and this is where it's easiest to take something as simple and straightforward as everyday vision, like you seeing me now. The conventional theory is that light's reflected from me, moves through the electromagnetic field, enters your eyes, inverted images on the retinas, changes in the cone cells, impulses up the optic nerve, and activation of different regions of the brain. I mean, that's known in greater detail than ever before. But does that explain vision? Well, no, it just describes what happens in the brain when you're seeing something. First of all, you're conscious of what you see. There's no explanation for consciousness. That's the hard problem. But secondly, everything you see is supposed to be inside your brain. All your experience is meant to be inside your brain. You may imagine that you're seeing me standing outside your brain on the stage, but actually what you're seeing is a little Rupert somewhere inside your head. And the whole of this room's inside your head. And if you go outdoors and look at the sky you're seeing is inside your head. Your experience of the sky is in your head. The debate on this was raised to a new level recently in the scientific literature by a paper called "Is Your Skull Beyond the Sky?" And the author of the paper, who's a materialist philosopher, answered, yes, everything you experience is inside your head. So if you look at the sky, the stars at night, they're inside your head. Your skull's beyond the sky. This skull is only a virtual skull created inside this virtual reality display inside your head. Now that's the conventional theory, taken to its logical extreme. Now most people probably wouldn't want to believe that. It's so astonishing and amazing. It's an astonishing hypothesis, as Francis Crick said. But do we have to believe it because science tells us so? No, we don't. It's just an assumption that it's all inside your head. It's not even tested. It's just an assumption. And there's an alternative. And the alternative is so simple, it's hard to understand. That is, that your image of me is located exactly where it seems to be, right here. It's not inside your head. Your head's where it seems to be. Your brain's exactly... and everything you're seeing is located outside you. Vision involves a two-way process. Light comes in, changes happen in the brain, and the images are projected out to where they seem to be. So our minds are projecting out a three-dimensional colored world. You could call it a virtual reality display, but it's one that coincides with the world we're in. Sometimes it doesn't. Then you have an illusion or a hallucination, but those are fortunately rare. We wouldn't have got here today. We'd be bumping into things all the time if there wasn't a close correspondence with our perceptions in the outer world. Normally there is. Our minds reach out to touch what we're looking at. We project out the images. If I look at you, I'm projecting out your image to where you are. It sort of overlaps you, where you are. If you look at a distant star, your mind reaches out over literally astronomical distances. So this is not a new theory. This is in fact the oldest of all theories of vision. Plato had it, the ancient Greeks believed it, Euclid had it. His theory of mirror images is based on projections. You project out what you see. When it's a mirror, your projections go straight through the glass because they're not physical like light is. They're mental, they go straight through the glass, and that's why you see things behind the mirror. You're projecting them there. And he worked that out before the Christian era. It's been known for more than 2,000 years, this theory of mirror images. Traditional people believe this, all the sophisticated Hindu and Buddhist philosophers believe it, and children under the age of 10 believe it. As Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, showed, until the age of 10 or 11, the average child thinks that vision involves a projection output of images, not just light coming to the eye, but a projection out. Until, as Piaget says, by the age of 10 or 11, the average child learns the correct view, which is that thoughts and images are invisible things located inside the head. So we've all learned the correct view, but is it correct? I think children under the age of 10 have got it more right than all these sophisticated professors of mind and neuroscience and so on. But I think that that's what's really happening. And what's more, I think we can test it. If our minds reach out to touch what we're looking at, we should be able to affect things by looking at them. If I look at you from behind and you don't know I'm there, perhaps my gaze could actually affect you. If there's something going out of my eye, if it's not just inside my head, could you actually feel the gaze of someone from behind? Now, as soon as you ask that, you see it's a common experience. Surveys show that more than 90% of people have had the experience of feeling they're being looked at from behind. They turn around, someone's staring at them. Or staring at others from behind and seeing them turn around. There is a slight sex difference. More women than men have experienced being stared at, and more men than women have experienced making others turn around by staring at them. Nevertheless, most people have had this experience all over the world, even young children. So what does science have to tell us about it? Well, until recently, nothing, because it was completely filtered out of psychology, even parapsychology. It was just a coincidence, an illusion, a folk belief, a superstition. Doesn't exist, can't exist. But it does exist. And I've done research on this. It's summarized in my book, The Sense of Being Stared At and Other Aspects of the Extended Mind, by, first of all, interviewing people who are professionals. Most of us are amateurs. But I've interviewed store detectives, the drug squad at Heathrow, surveillance officers, people who run private detective training courses. they will take it completely for granted. If you go on a private detective training course, probably very few of you have. So, when you're being trained how to follow somebody, the first thing you learn is don't stare at their back, because if you do, they're likely to turn around and catch your eye and blow your colour. You have to look at them a bit, or else you lose them, but you look at their feet. It's taken for granted. And if you do experiments on this, which now many have been done, the basic, simplest experiment is the subject is blindfolded, the other person's behind them, they work in pairs. They either look or don't look in a random series of trials, and people guess if they're being looked at or not, they're right or wrong. The chance level would be 50%. Consistently, over hundreds of thousands of trials, it's coming in around 55 to 60%. Which is not a very impressive, huge effect, but it's way above chance statistically with such large samples. And some people are much better at it than others. The people who are best at this, on average, are children up to the age of 9. In other words, just the age group where they take for granted that vision works that way. Young children are much more sensitive than grown-ups. Most of us have desensitized ourselves. It even seems to work through closed-circuit television. Experiments done in America and in Britain have shown that people are physiologically more aroused, measuring their skin resistance, when they're being watched on CCTV by someone in another room than when they're not being watched. They're not even conscious of it, but there's a physiological arousal. I think this is probably something very ancient. Animals have it too. They can tell when they're being watched, and people can tell when they're being watched by animals. I think it had probably evolved in the context of predator-prey relations. Any prey animal that could feel a hidden predator watching it would stand a better chance of escaping than one that couldn't feel it. So I think it may have been around a very long time. I think we have it as humans, not because we're super sophisticated with brilliant minds. I think we have it just because we're animals. And I think it's a very widespread ability in the animal kingdom. But so far uninvestigated, because there's a total taboo on this until recently, a total taboo. But when you remove the taboo, it'd be very interesting to find